Joyce Tyrrell. You probably don't know the name, but Joyce was a saint. Nearly 30 years ago I started at a new parish. I was young, I was green, and Joyce was one of the church wardens. She was a generous person, a retired professional, wonderful sense of humour, remarkably wise, could see the complexities of human relationships, come up with positive strategy, very patient. But above all, she had this incredible sense of courage of conviction. She was a faithful person, and that faithfulness was reflected in her courage to act with integrity and support others with generosity. She was a diminutive person, but she had this big heart, and because of her big heart and because of her courage, she enabled others. And in my view, she was one of the great saints of the church. Today is All Saints' Day in the life of the church. It's a complex and important feast day. It's a time to remember those who have gone before us. And of course, it's a time to grieve, to express a sense of lament for people that we've lost. But what I want to suggest today is that for me, All Saints' Day is about here and now. It's about the people of faith here and now, and how we live out that faith, and discovering that sense of faithfulness and courage and integrity that Joyce had, which shaped my life and shaped the lives of others. All Saints' Day is a celebration of the work of the divine in our lives, which transforms us radically and deeply. It's a day where we recognise this deep, powerful force for transformation and for the healing of the church and others. Now, the Gospel reading for today comes from the Gospel of Matthew, and it's the Beatitudes. Beautiful reading, chapter 5, the first 13 verses. Wonderful phrases, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the meek. Very popular, very well known, the sort of thing that we stick up on the fridge as a reminder of important sentiments. But because they've been used in such a lavish way, there's a risk that they're trivialised. If we look closely at the Beatitudes, you could argue that the Beatitudes in many ways represent the roadmap or the template for what it means to be part of the communion of saints here and now, what it means to be a church that is radically transformed. Each of the Beatitudes, in a sense, whilst familiar, the way they're presented represents a challenge to us to go deeper. So wonderful, they may appear to be a list of virtues or ethical commitments, which they are, but in the context of the Sermon on the Mount, they're asking for something more of us. Bit after the section after the Beatitudes, we have Jesus talking about his ministry, and he describes it that he's come to fulfill the law and the prophets, and in so doing, he expects to manifest, and he expects his followers to manifest a righteousness, a greater righteousness than that of some of the would-be religious figures of his time. So let's just reflect for a moment on the word righteousness, which then helps us make sense of the Beatitudes. The term righteousness within the Jewish Christian tradition was used in three interrelated ways. There was a kind of legal dimension, a government or a king had certain rights to institute, certain rights to act. There's a sense in which righteousness is about governance in modern language. There's an ethical component which is picked up clearly in the Beatitudes themselves, and of course there's a reference to righteousness there. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. But the other dimension that I want to pick up here is it's about relationships. It's about right relationships, about restoring relationships. It's about creating relationships which are just and compassionate. This is the context then for understanding the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes, which are just wonderful, and especially the way that the writer of the Gospel of Matthew has expanded them and crafted them. And this writer has deliberately put them in the context of the beginning of the ministry of Jesus, that Jesus has come about personal and ethical integrity, but also about right relationships. And pivotal to all this, pivotal to the fulfillment of the Beatitudes, for us acting as a communion of saints, is that in order for those relationships to be made just and compassionate, it requires from us a radical transformation, a deep transformation. Arguably, the great theme of Christian spirituality is that of dying and rising. It goes back to the theme of the resurrection. But the inference is that as practicing Christians, we are to live a life which is open to the ongoing possibility of dying and rising. And in that experience of dying and rising, we are not only celebrating, but we are expressing a deep sense of transformation. It's a little bit like, the old Sunday school story where we talk about the transformation of the Christian life is a bit like metamorphosis, the dramatic transformation from the caterpillar to the butterfly. That's the kind of dramatic metaphor that we need to capture, in essence, the deep and lasting transformation to which we are called. Without it, we die. Without that deep sense of transformation, we perish. And in a way, this is the theme in Franz Kafka's book, The Metamorphosis, and the character Gregor Samsa. In many ways, his life, because he does not undergo that deep transformation, he goes into a permanent state of atrophy. He withers away. So let's return to the theme of All Saints' Days. What I'm suggesting then this day, it's a day for us here and now, and it requires from us not only the ethical commitments that we see displayed in the Beatitudes, but a deep and permanent transformation, an ongoing commitment to the way of transformation. Now that can sometimes be tricky in the life of the church because churches quickly form and develop a veneer of goodwill. By veneer, I don't mean that it's pretend or that it doesn't have any merit. But it's very easy to be a member of a friendly church. Nearly all churches present themselves as friendly church, like welcome. It's lovely to have you here. We're a friendly church. But like a lot of human organisations, we actually have to work hard to go to that deeper level, to move from a friendly church to a transformed church. And if we don't go through that process of deep transformation, like the figure of Gregor Samsa, we will wither and die. One of the dangers in the church is because there is a strong sense of sentimentality in the way we describe relationships, is that we can mask serious relationship problems within the life of a church. It's like in a family. In a family system, we're brought up in certain ways, and there are elements of co-dependency in most families and of dysfunctionality. And hopefully, as we mature, we can identify the elements of codependency. We can name the dysfunctionality within our family, and we can go off and do some work on that. We can show some courage for the sake of the family, for the sake of that family unit. We'll take ourselves on. We will take ourselves seriously. So let's return to the image of Joyce Tyrrell, this wonderful person who was very much a mentor for me and influenced my life. Joyce had some tragedies in her life. In many ways, it was a sad life. And she'd done her grieving, and she never dismissed or trivialised her own experience of suffering. But she took herself on. She took her problems seriously. She took her life seriously, and she was open to the spirit of transformation. She was open to that spirit of dying and rising. She showed the kind of courage that creates powerful transformation, not only in personal lives, but in the lives of Christian communities. She discovered in many ways a really important element of Christian piety or Christian spirituality. It's the notion of self-transcendence. All of us are created in the image of God. All of us are spiritual beings. All of us have problems. All of us experience the ambiguity of relationships in family and in churches. But there is an inherent capacity within each and every one of us. It's our spiritual birthright, where with honesty and transparency we look at our lives, we speak the truth of our lives, and in so doing we find a courage to transcend those circumstances and to live with new purpose and courage. All Saints' Day is a wonderful day in the life of the church. I think it's a central feast. It's a central feast day because it captures, I think, the essence of the ministry of Jesus. Jesus came with this wonderful message of the possibility of a deep, powerful transformation, of this spirituality of dying and rising, of a spirituality that manifests itself in compassion and courage. And so this day, we give thanks and praise to God for the gift of the Joyce Tyrrells in our lives, but also we take up the challenge. We take up the personal challenge of taking ourselves seriously, of Christian communities taking ourselves seriously, and willing to take a risk, willing to be transparent, open and compassionate, willing to be transformed. In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer and Sustainer. Amen.